we bring Carolyn and Rohit Rao, Dr. Rao, so you can join us, and we'll go through the questions and comments in turn. And I have already introduced the three speakers from the industry, and asked to see our additional panelist, Andrew Morris, and my dear friend, collaborator, a specialist in infection disease and a professor of medicine at the University of Toronto, and a member of the Ontario Science Table. I interact with Dr. Andrew Morris more in terms of antimicrobial drug resistance, and he has been playing a major leadership role in the antimicrobial stewardship program, both in the Mount Sinai Health System, University Health Network, in the province, in the country, and globally. And his academic interest leaderships overlap the fields, epidemiology, behavior change techniques, implementation science, and quality improvement is all related to, they still relate to the antimicrobial microbial use and resistance. So thank you, Andrew, to join us. And maybe we should give Andrew a opportunity to make a few remarks. Andrew.
Sure. First of all, I enjoyed, I caught three of those presentations. I've been triple booked, so my apologies. I think either COVID therapeutics and mathematical modeling have interfaced tremendously. And I think over the last several months in particular, we've seen an increasing need to understand the mathematics around therapeutics, both on the clinical aspect for some of the things like the pharmacodynamic kinetic and modeling of the behavior of the disease process, but also as it relates to the trajectory of the disease and supply chains. Right now in Ontario, many of the therapeutics that have been discussed, so the antivirals, the monoclonal antibodies, or I guess the neutralizing antibodies that Dr. Rao, as he was terming it, as well as the anti-inflammatory agents such as corticosteroids and IL-6 inhibitors, those have all played a huge role in our therapeutic armamentarium. At the moment, I would say that our greatest limitations for helping patients is actually drug supply. That's our major challenge right now. And we've had a tremendous difficulty in being able to titrate our response and understand how to manage our supply as it relates to the epidemic curves. So we're always behind the 8 ball to some degree. So what's happened, at least in the last year, is when there's a low amount of clinical use, because there's very few cases, we seem to have a plethora of supply of agents. And then what happens is that the cases rise and those numbers of agents dwindle substantially. And I'm not involved directly in drug supply, but what ends up happening is we too late cut back in using our agents, and so we run out, and then we hold on with our rationing for too long. So as the epidemic curve is waning, we still hold a tight rein on rationing the agents. So there's a tremendous opportunity, not only in terms of the individual patient modeling, but also from a population-based aspect related to the modeling and the supply and supply chain management of the therapeutic agents. I'm going to stop now.
Thank you, Andrew. I do have questions for you, but later on, and let me read one question just freshly posed from my colleague to Dr. Chow, and the question is related to on both machine learning models and the mechanistic model part of the pharmacometrics. And how do you see the rules of machine learning and the mechanistic models? Dr. Chow?
Is it better if I talk on this side or this side?
In the middle. Yes, that's right.
Okay, good. I won't move my head. If I heard the question correctly, the question was about mechanistic models versus
and machine learning.
Machine learning. So you heard Rohit talk about mechanistic models. I would say that there's been a lot of impact from a drug metabolism standpoint. It's harder, and I think in infectious disease, there's been a lot of impact from mechanistic modeling there. Machine learning, that is something that's early days. You more so in the molecular engineering piece, they're starting to really make a big impact there. But we're starting to see it certainly in discovery, doing a lot of machine learning. But yeah, I would say early days. I was part of a working group trying to come up with a guidance for that. And we really have limited case studies at this point, but I would say that people are really starting to jump in there with a lot of really good ideas.
Right, maybe I continue with this. I hesitate to ask the question because we still have this vibration of the voice, but it's interesting questions to the audience, because especially I see some students in the audience. So I mean, this is about a decade ago, the FDA adopted a policy change that the mathematical modeling can be part of the evidence presented, and can be even used as some substitute of certain phases of the clinical trial, which I think is an opportunity for mathematical model to really contribute to speeding process of development and approval. And my feeling is this is more in terms of oncology, especially talk about the cancer drugs, and not in terms of the vaccines, especially emerging infectious disease. Has this changed much within FDA? And we'll come back to Canadian system later.
I would say that from a mechanistic standpoint, I think it's more so what our colleague from Sanofi was talking about, that we're trying to use the natural history of infection to be able to model the effect of vaccination. From a mechanistic standpoint, there has been some work actually from Pfizer about, because there's some unknowns about antibody response, but I would say the early days for that.
Thank you. So, Carolyn mentioned Sanofi, so maybe I can turn this on to Ed and Dr. Thommes, but maybe I just want to recall a major event that Sanofi played a very significant role in collaboration with Health Canada, but with participation for all the major vaccine industries in Canada, Pfizer, I remember GSK, they're all there. A special event to discuss how health economics and in particular mathematical modeling can contribute to the vaccine product immunization program in Canada. I just wondering how has advanced, but that's, I think, is about 80 years ago. So, and Dr. Thommes.
Right. Yeah. And I mean that precedes my time at Sanofi. I was actually, was I I guess I was maybe at GSK at that time.
It is at GSK, yes.
Right. No, I mean, I certainly looked at that as a very, positive thing. And I mean, this sort of engagement is important. And I mean, there's always the challenge. And I mean, I certainly had that experience many times of going around and talking to decision makers, and then, having to present, modeling results, but I mean, in a very sort of antiseptic and not maybe, very engaging way, inevitably, because I mean, you're putting up the results, you're not actually, ideally what you would really want to be doing is you would want to be able to hand people something that they can play around with themselves, something like, what would happen in oncology or otherwise. I mean, there's always the trouble with infectious diseases and vaccines is that you're often dealing with these dynamic transmission models, and complexity is inherent in them. But I mean, I think one positive thing that has come out of the last couple of years and all the other bad things that we've been living through is, I think it's reset the expectations of how people deal with and how people disseminate modeling and modeling results. Because I mean, we've seen group after group not just publish COVID projections, COVID forecasts, and so on and so forth, but actually to make their models publicly available, post them on GitHub, or even put them on, make them a web app, make them accessible on a web page, like John Hong's own, Liam's COVID forecast tool. And so, and I mean, this is sort of the utopian vision that I would have, that we get towards a state where this becomes the norm. And it's difficult to get there. I mean, it requires discipline, I think, on the side of the modelers to embrace the Einstein principle of every model should be as simple as it can be, but no simpler, which of course is much easier said than done. But I mean, thinking back to some of the things I've worked on, I mean, I think there are lots of places where one can abstract things away, where one can simplify things, and maybe make the some of the fidelity or the bells and whistles not be so extensive, but to help on the side of interpretability. And I mean, in my experience, keeping that in mind and striving towards that is definitely something worthwhile to do. But I mean, on the other side of that, of course, having this sort of initiatives for wider engagement, having especially, as I think inevitably is also now happening, as we're seeing happening, and this I think is a really good thing, of having more support for training a future generation of people who are modelers, of people who can understand modeling, who can engage with it, is the other side of the solution that is very important.
I just want to echo what you're saying in the context of what the Carolyn's introduction of the FDA's policy and towards accepting modeling and perhaps machine learning that my colleague raised into is part of the collections of scientific evidence. So when during that event that all the vaccine industries participate along with Health Canada, so I was very excited as a modeler, because what I mean is if all the submission has to engage serious health economics analysis, all the health economic analysis has to be based on the mathematical modeling, then there's a huge need of the talent, the modelers, from both regulatory agency point of view, but also from the industry point of view. And I just hope that that trend is going to continue, and of course, and having this kind of continual collaboration is Edward, you just mentioned the Sanofi academic collaboration, really gave an opportunity for the students of next generation to really know the industry setting. And I just hope, I mean, Andrea, you're on a national agenda and many fronts. So this might, I feel there is still a lot of room to improve in terms in Canada, Nazi in particular, to engage modeling, engage health economics more timely and in a more proactive way. And that's come back to really what Andrew you said about the supply issues. And I want to go further back to this, how really the mathematical modeling can proactively address this issue. If is that because really the supply, or is that because we did not anticipate the urgent need of the especially in this time we're talking about the treatment. I know Dr. Norris, you have been appearing for rapid processing of the proof process of the drugs, and how do you think mathematics, machine learning as well, can be really assessed this process?
Well, I think there's a bunch of opportunities, to be honest with you. You already talked about the pharmacoeconomics of it. We're at a really interesting time in our history, really, because these therapeutics are being purchased and disseminated without really any public discussion around the economics of it. Whereas for almost every other disease, provincial governments pay for therapeutics. And with COVID, the federal government is procuring the drugs on behalf of the provinces, and really purchasing on behalf of the provinces, and then distributing them outwards. So the provinces aren't as nearly interested in the stewardship of these agents. And the federal government, in a understandably in a non-transparent way, is procuring these agents without much of a discussion of cost or the benefit. And so the way we're stewarding these agents is strictly by a supply, from a supply perspective, rather than a cost effectiveness benefit. And so the reason why we're rationing many of the agents that we are currently is not because the cost benefit has an inflection point, but rather because of a supply mandated inflection point. So we're only giving it to the patients who are by far and away the most likely to benefit, and it's only because of supply rather than cost effectiveness. But more to your point around the where modeling could also help in terms of the supply management, I think we've seen in real time the challenges. I don't think, I can't remember, to be honest with you, any time in our history where we have had multiple things change in real time, to the point that, for example, with Ontario Sciences Table and the clinical practice guidelines group that I chair, since January, we've had 3 different versions of the guidelines. We're on version 9 of our clinical practice guidelines in the past year alone, and those 9 versions are because there've been changes in drug availability because of licensing. So we have new therapeutics or new evidence for therapeutics, as well as dynamic changes in the disease trajectory. And then on top of that, something that I don't think many of us anticipated, but agents that we had thought were going to be effective or were effective for a while, for example, some of the monoclonal antibodies, all of a sudden they lose their effectiveness because of resistance, because of the new variants. And all of a sudden, not only does that mean that those agents aren't available, but it automatically shifts the balance in terms of the supplies. So when you have 3 agents to treat a disease, and all of a sudden you now have 1 agent to treat a disease, the impact on supply chains is huge, right? So you have the same number of cases, but you have roughly 1/3. I'm obviously simplifying it, but 1/3 the agents that we had to treat it. So all those things moving in real time makes it very difficult to manage in real time. But some of this could certainly be anticipated, modeled out, and mitigation measures could also be employed. But to be honest with you, most of the people who are involved in decision making around this, they just don't have the tools available to them to think about it in this way, and that's why I think there'd be huge opportunities from a mathematical perspective.
Thank you, Andrew. And now I would like to encourage the speakers that to look at the chart to see any of the questions, comments you can address. I know some of the questions need a blackboard, but some of them maybe you can answer and address. So let me know if you feel you would like to address this.
I had exactly what I was afraid of happen, which is that somebody asked me a question about renormalization group theory, and I've tried to answer it, which was a bit of a non-answer. And I am the wrong species of physicist to understand how nuclear physics works.
Great. So I think that's one of the reasons I want to test your real background. I emphasize that I have 2 physicists in the group. So I realize that might need a blackboard. Dr. Rao, if you, I do remember there are 2 questions for your lectures, if you feel like to address, and if it's not that technical, I will.
Sure. I think there was a question that I might have responded to. So it was about whether we could use potentially dead virus to match the RT-PCR, so sort of the viral load trajectories a little better in our model. And I think that is a sort of a correct assumption and suggestion. I think so. We did consider using that essentially an implementation of dead virus that does not contribute to further activation, further infection of susceptible cells. However, at the time, we did think that the way we capture the trajectories was reasonable, given that we're able to capture viral load trajectories with viral loads varying from about 7-8 log 10 to about 3 log 10. So it's a fairly wide range of order of magnitudes, and the most clinically relevant regime there, as well as the lower limit of about 3 log 10 being close to the detection limits of many of these PCR assays. So at the time, we did think that this was reasonable, but it could, since we have thought about it, it is a refinement that we might push in terms of the code, update the code subsequently. So, thanks for the question.
Thank you. Now, come to the next round of questions. This is relevant to the central idea of this network and our PI, especially Dr. Kumamuti, and we really want to make this a global leader in integrative modeling. And so in this setting, and we have both the drugs for treatment, and now we have the pharmaceutical products, and we have vaccines. And yesterday we also heard from Dr. Alison McGee about the efficacies of different vaccine products against infection and against severity. And I'm just wondering, especially in the decision-making process, how you balance this. I mean, given now we anticipate drug is treatment is available, would that have impact of the behaviors, and would that impact on the desire and the have impact on the vaccine hesitancy? And in addition to Dr. Morris' expertise, and when you have the drug treatment in the population, would you have concern about the drug resistance, for example? So maybe again, start with Andrew.
So there's a bunch of questions bundled in there. One of them is around the availability of therapeutics and whether that alters people's behavior. I think it depends. We actually saw this in the southern US, especially in Florida, but in some other southern US states as well, where a huge rollout of the monoclonal antibodies absolutely altered people's behaviors because they stopped seeing a justification for getting vaccinated. I guess in a setting where there is very widespread use of very effective therapeutics, it's an understandable behavior. It totally misunderstands some of the other benefits of vaccination, and it ignores the possibilities of monoclonal antibody resistance, and it also, more importantly, ignores the real challenges around supply. But the issue of resistance is a real one, and I don't think we've fully understood what's the interplay between use of therapeutics and selection pressure and resistance. I think the greatest discussion around that has been related to molnupiravir, which is a Merck agent that is mutagenic. And so there's been numerous, primarily evolutionary biologists, who are quite concerned about the selective advantage that this might promote regarding viral resistant strains to not only molnupiravir, but also to other agents, and therefore also perhaps vaccine-induced antibodies, as well as monoclonal antibodies. So I think we're still really early in understanding this, and hopefully what will happen is, if there is more widespread use of a variety of these antiviral agents, that will have good surveillance to help understand the resistance. And that data would be really informative, especially if it's piped into modelers to help understand the disease dynamics around it and the resistance dynamics. But I think we're in early days around that.
Right. During the pandemic flu season and time, I think that was a very active research. It was a real concern. I think there is a very active Canadian research group handling those issues, and I just feel that the history may tell us this may become another issue as well. So now, I have a question. This is come to my mind, but it's also raised from the PI, and Dr. Kumamuti. He is not only the PI of the project, but is also the director of Fields Institute. And as you all know, this is a network that's supported by all the national research institute across the country, and we have one from in the Atlantic region, ARMS, the Quebec region, Quebec in the ARMS, and Pacific PIMS, and then Fields Institute, and we are taking the training and building the next generation of capacity for the future pandemic seriously. And one of the issues one of the concern, and we all have, and this is really for all the industries and for the government agencies that Andrew, you're very well associated. It's really, are you all planning to hire modelers? And how I mean, we are generating a good quality and good amount of high quality modelers, and one of the issue we're considering how this can be sustained. So maybe this is a question that I can start with Albert Thommes, because you're building your new center of excellence in Lyon.
Right. Yeah. It's a very good question. I mean, the Center of Excellence is intended to be, very analogously to the York Sanofi collaboration, a kind of a seed, or I guess a hub for exactly this sort of academic or wider academic collaboration. So I guess, if the question is the company itself hiring more modelers, I think there's always going to be some demand for that, and we've sort of managed to concentrate a bunch of the epidemiologists all in one place. So this MEDS is the on the global side of the company, and it's sort of a combination of epidemiologists and statisticians and former CDC and WHO people, and So definitely, I mean, that particular profile exists and that continues to be sought out. I mean, what I've been learning in talking to some of the people from R&D in particular is, you know, the idea of a modeler, and certainly modeler in industry, and as we're seeing in this session here too, of course, with Carolyn and Rohit, I mean, it's much broader than just the idea of epidemiological modeling. I mean, there are, you know, getting back to actually this was at a fields workshop some number of years ago. I ran into somebody from this was when I was at GSK, and I met somebody from GSK who I'd never met before, who turned out to be also a modeler, but he, you know, was doing modeling of you know, what happens inside of bioreactors, very challenging and tricky stuff involving, you know, scads of partial differential equations. And so I think, you know, if you think of it broadly like that, I mean, there's always going to be a demand, and there's going to be a broader and, you know, bigger and bigger demand. And I mean, we, like pretty much everybody else, are, you know, investing heavily also in AI and machine learning and all these sorts of things. Of course, the challenge is always to make sure that it's, you know, a real and useful thing that does real and useful tasks and isn't just, you know, at the level of a buzzword. And I think all industries have, except maybe, you know, the tech industry directly, have had to struggle with that to some degree. But I mean, the great thing is now we're seeing more and more of these, you know, applications, directly useful applications, and you know, the appetite for, I think, hiring more people that can do these things is only going to increase.
Thank you. Carolyn, any comments?
Hopefully you can all hear me, all you students out there, because we cannot keep our QSP modelers. We can't keep our QP2 modelers. There's such a high demand right now for that expertise of modeling. And we talk about data science. There's many buzzwords, of course, but there is a genuine demand, a genuinely increasing need for that expertise now that people are starting to recognize that it's as valuable as it is.
Thank you. Dr. Rao, so your work is so theoretic, somehow I feel. So I assume you would really like to see more modelers in your group. And
Definitely. So that's, yeah, as Carolyn mentioned, I think we've been, you know, it took a while, I think, for QSP and other mechanistic modeling type approaches to gain acceptance. And now I think they are gaining increasing acceptance. And we've been, you know, at this point, I think we have more projects than we have people that we can put on them. So it's definitely a very good job market. And I think we can say similar things for things like data science and AI. I think Pfizer's early clinical development division has also begun a new AI division recently. I think there are certain data sets that are becoming richer to support some of these initiatives. So yeah, I think it's definitely a very good time.
thank you. Now, I have a question for Dr. Morris. It's kind of personal, but it's public. So we co-supervise quite a few trainees and those who co-supervise very highly successful in the career development. You remember all the names, Amy Herfer, for example, and she who from now she's in Miami. And however, you did show no interest in some of the trainees. I don't have to name them. So what made you really think the quality of trainees at the modelers, right? And you think is going to make this, in our case, more interdisciplinary research successful? So
it's a difficult question. So I think on the clinical side and I guess the epidemiologic side and healthcare related perspective, what we need to be able to do is communicate what our needs are and what the problems are, right? Physicians and most healthcare researchers don't have the tools and knowledge around mathematical models to solve some of the problems that we have. So we have to be able to look to the mathematical modelers, and we have to be able to communicate. What I think the mathematical modelers therefore need, other than obviously having excellent fundamentals of modeling and the use of different models, but I think being able to grasp the various clinical or public health challenges, and being able to translate what those real problems are into models that make sense, and also to be able to communicate them quite well. I find that normally what happens with many of my peers, and I was like that for a while, is that as soon as somebody starts talking about a mathematical model, if we see any Greek letters, if we see an integral sign, if we see anything that brings us back to our calculus or algebra days, then we just turn off and we stop listening because we don't think that it has a clinical relevance. And I think that's, we obviously don't want that response. And so I think the people who are able to communicate effectively to clinicians, to clinical researchers or epidemiologic researchers, and can simplify it and also explain what the models, how they're developed and what they mean, I think those are going to be really helpful moving forward and being able to foster that collaboration. And I think that's always the problem with the interdisciplinary collaboration. It's always an issue of lexicon. The language is totally different. We use different languages, and to be able to bridge them on both sides. I don't see this as just a mathematical modeler's responsibility. I think it's the people on the healthcare side as well. They also need to be able to communicate in a manner that the modelers understand.
Thank you. I understand this is what you're trying to say. This is a bidirectional process. Is also reciprocal linkage. It's not a one way, but it really is a way. It's is bi-way, and it's also a iterative process. Our colleague from industry have other comments on these issues, and really what make a modeler desirable in your setting, in your company. Thomas, you are muted.
No, it's just, this is more sort of on the anecdotal side, but I was just thinking, actually also going back to another, all of my memories seem to be fields related today. A talk that I gave a couple years ago now, I mean, I'd been thinking about this question of how do you reconcile the need to do, reasonably sophisticated models and, models that do interesting things with the need to have them be interpretable by decision makers, have them be, usable in the first place by decision makers, not have them be in some, MATLAB or something that nobody has installed on their computer. So I was experimenting with, is it possible to write a dynamic transmission model inside of Excel, using VBA? And I, subjected myself to some amount of pain and suffering to do that. And I sort of got a little toy version working, and I was very pleased with myself. And then I talked about this, and the reaction from the room was basically, could be summed up as, why would you do that to yourself? And I think, this is maybe an illustration of sometimes the kinds of skills or the kinds of things that maybe are useful. And I would still maintain that something this is useful. I just need to find the right people to work with to apply it. These sorts of things are not necessarily always overlapping exactly with what we would think, just being only in the realm of academia. You would be much more inclined to try and make a very, high fidelity model that has all the different moving parts in it that you can think of. and maybe not so much worry about ideas of, interpretability. Well, no, interpretability is always important, but is this something that you're going to be able to explain in very simple and very plain English? And is this something that maybe somebody can even run themselves? And so I think this sort of, kind of broader and maybe somewhat interdisciplinary, or thinking out, beyond the horizon of one's own training kind of approach, and is definitely useful. It's certainly something that I've, this is just one, sort of only peripherally relevant anecdote, but I mean, I've found this in so many situations.
I'll
Never,
jump in, because I think
go
we
ahead.
only have a couple of minutes. I completely agree with the previous panelists. I will say that it's not that easy to say that we need to communicate well. What does that really mean?
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who, myself included, faced with one particular problem. You have to understand not just the technical aspects of what was done, but the conceptual, theoretical framework, or you can't explain it. I mean, really, you can't get down into the nitty-gritty. You have to explain at a conceptual level what the model is. And so you're talking through many levels of expertise. You have to have the deep technical expertise, you have to have the conceptual expertise, and then you have to be able to really capture the core idea and use simple words. The people you're communicating to are not, they're scientists. They are also thinking about the same problem. You don't have to dumb it down, but you have to really explain the heart of what you do.
Thank you, Carolyn. So, Dr. Rao, last word about what you wish to have from the modeling community. What kind of model you want us to produce for you?
No, I think I'd echo everything that the previous panelists just said. I think communication is really key, and as Carolyn said, it both at the real technical level, at the conceptual level, as well as I think at the strategic level, being able to understand the strategic context in which any of your results really impact, say, a portfolio. So I think both coupling of both technical expertise and being able to have the facility to communicate easily, I think both of those are critical skills, and very highly valued in the industry, definitely.
Thank you. Any final remark, Andrew? So I'm going to. I just wanted to thank. Yeah, go ahead, please, Andrew.
No, I don't have anything to add. I think this has been a really helpful and fruitful discussion, and for me, it was really helpful to see some of the other ways that that I wasn't necessarily involved with, and how modeling has been used in various aspects, both in drug development and in treatment paradigms.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming to this session and speaking, and to the panel discussion. It's a very useful, insightful sharing of your experience working with modeler and modeling communities. And Andrew, I want to promise you that we're going to teach our students not only Greek but Latin as well. So with that note, I want to